Wonderful. Next up, we have an interview with Brian Dolan and Deborah Bass. For those of you, I'll let you both introduce yourselves. Both of these folks are veterans of digital healthcare and mobile healthcare. And you probably all recognize Brian's name from the byline of one of the biggest publications in digital health and health IT over the last 20 years. But Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Stan. It's great to be here. Yeah, just for the first minute or two, I'd love to introduce myself and Debra. So my name, as Stan said, is Brian Dolan. You may remember me from my first media startup, Moby Health News. It's one of the early publications focused on digital health. Started up in 2008 and became a part of HIMSS Media in 2015. So these days, I'm writing a new digital health research site. It's called Exits and Outcomes. We offer 3 newsletters focused on funding, employer-focused digital health, and pharma-focused, as well as FDA-regulated digital health. In addition to the newsletters, we also write long-form research reports. Usually those dig into a specific company, including United Health Group, Omada Health, Pear Therapeutics, Hinge Health, and more. So that's enough about me. For the next 9 minutes or so, I'll be interviewing Debra Bass. Debra is the president of Nuvo Group in the United States and its global chief marketing officer. So we're going to learn more about the company Nuvo in a minute, but a little bit more about Debra. Debra is a seasoned commercial leader with deep experience in consumer-driven health and wellness. And after 25 plus years of big company experience, working at leading multinational companies on some of the world's most iconic brands, including Tide, CoverGirl, and Johnson's Baby, she made a bold move recently to an early stage health tech startup, which is focused on advancing women's health. So in addition to her day job, Debra is active in women's leadership, serving on the P&G Alumni Women's Forum Steering Committee and actively mentoring emerging female leaders. So welcome, Debra.
Thank you, Brian.
So just to kick it off, I'd love to learn more about Nuvo itself. Could you just, for the audience, describe Nuvo's current offerings along with your current business model?
Sure. So Nuvo is an Israeli health tech company with very novel and recently FDA-cleared technology for remote pregnancy monitoring and management. So it's been interesting following the dialogue on the evolution of monitoring, right? And we haven't really talked about women's health or pregnancy. The way the platform works is there's 3 components. There's a wearable sensor band that's essentially the data capture device, fetal heart rate, maternal heart rate, uterine activity, a cloud computing environment where really all the action happens in terms of the data capture, processing, deep computational power. And then there's a visualization layer that's really a connected app for a doctor and patient virtual visit. In terms of the business model, it's platform as a service. So we are not selling devices, but rather digital pregnancy services in the form of monitoring hours. And those could be tailored according to doctor protocol and use case, based on what's needed at a patient level.
I see. So when a patient is given the device, it's sort of like an iRhythm model where it's shipped to the patient and then they ship it back if they're given one?
Exactly right. So it's RX initiated and we ship directly to patient. We set up the visits according to the doctor protocol. Mom completes her episode of care and then returns the device to Nuvo, and we'll decontaminate it, refurbish it, ready for the next patient.
Great. And so you did give me a little bit of a sneak peek of Nuvo's slide deck. So I have a little bit of insight into maybe the roadmap. So we don't need to give too much of that away, but for the next 2 questions, I'd love to dig in a little bit about sort of where you see the future for Nuvo. And one potential customer, maybe even going into next year in 2022, was self-insured employers. So how would that work? How would Nuvo work with self-insured? And would that, constitute a different offering altogether, or would it be similar to what you're doing today?
Yeah, no, that's actually an excellent question. So I would describe self-insured employers as an evolution of the offering. So when we think about the employer space, there are probably 2 big value props for pregnancy. One, tucking into that bundle of benefits for reproductive health or family care, which is really important for talent acquisition and retention when you think about millennials, right, who really want to go to a company that supports their lifestyle needs. So one, having the right pregnancy bundle of benefits is critical for talent. The other opportunity, though, when you look at self-insured employers, because they take on the risk and the cost, is leaning into pregnancy population health management, which is an emerging space. So it would be an evolution of our offering because we're starting with what we're calling distributed care delivery, starting to shift care delivery to the home, hopefully eventually getting to virtual first, per the earlier conversation. But the evolution of the offering for self-insured employers and payers is to really lean into our big data AI play to really better manage the population, identify high risk early, and then get into better pathways for management to reduce costs on the back end.
Great. Yeah. And you mentioned that virtual first. I know that's been a pretty big part of the conversation so far today. And, kind of tying this back to what happened at JP Morgan in the past week, I was able to catch a presentation from another company in women's health, Maven Clinic, which I would say is an example of one of these virtual first care providers. And then also another company that's similar in some ways to Nuvo, AliveCore, just in that they have, a device, it's a cardiac monitor device. They made a number of announcements, and the one that really caught my ear was a move that sounds a lot like this sort of virtual first offering. So they're trying to evolve into a more comprehensive care solution, even adding in cardiac coaching along with, building out on the subscription offerings they have today. So obviously this is a trend, and it seems to be at least one path for companies like Nuvo that kind of start out with at least a key piece of your offering being this remote monitoring technology. So I was just wondering, is that on Nuvo's roadmap? Have you considered that as potential evolution? And, I think as we've seen, the question remains, do all roads lead to an MPI? Do you eventually become a care provider?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent question, one we heavily debate internally every day. And as we sort of get our footing in the market, we do see the need for a fuller stack solution and including clinical services as part of the offering, a la AliveCore, a la K Health and others we look at. And why is that important? Because when you look at OB, obstetrics today, and maternal fetal medicine, it's inherently capacity constrained. 50% of US counties today have no practicing OB. Maternal fetal medicine resources are even more scarce. So we really need to augment provider capacity, and Nuvo is uniquely equipped to do that through the data we collect. And if we bring in clinical services to sort of have a command center, where we could sort of provide that support broadly and to remote areas and other areas that really need it.
Great. Now I just want to be conscious of the time. There's about 2 minutes left here. And I know Nuvo recently had two pretty big announcements, one around a new customer and one around a new market authorization, or at least a submission for one. So I'd love to have you kind of hit on that. And then also, just as sort of a maybe closing question, there are a number of companies that have done somewhat similar things to what Nuvo's doing today. I think the one that comes to mind for me is maybe Sense for Baby, which spun out of the West Health Institute and became a part of Airstrip a few years back. And I'm just curious about the timing for Nuvo. It seems like the timing today is much better maybe than it was 5-6 years ago. Can kind of speak to the market conditions that make Nuvo more likely to be successful than maybe some of these initiatives in the past, along with those announcements as well.
Sure. So really quickly on the announcement. So we announced two big things over the past couple of weeks. One was our first enterprise commercial agreement with Axia Women's Health, which is a single specialty provider in obstetrics. What's exciting about Axia is they're really a progressive provider leaning into value-based care. And that's the right customer for Nuvo because ultimately it's about value versus volume. The second announcement was we submitted our next indication to FDA, which is for uterine activity, to allow us to expand our offering to include remote non-stress tests, which are a critical part of the pathway. Your last question, why Nuvo, why now? So many of others have failed before us. Why now? We're really at the collision of two relevant crises for maternal health. One is the maternal health crisis. And if you look at America, rising mother mortality, unsustainable costs in pregnancy care, and just when we need more care, shortage of OBs, like we said. The second crisis is the pandemic, where pregnant women need access to continuous care, but the pandemic has kept them away from clinics. So really, this is the right time for pregnancy health, and Nuvo has the right platform designed for self-administration, clinically validated, FDA cleared, ready for prime time, starting with Axia.
That's great. Thanks, Deborah. This is a quick 10 minutes, but I think we covered a lot of ground. So I'm going to turn things back to Stan.
Thank you. And thank you, Stan, for the opportunity.
No, Deborah, really appreciate it. And again, and thank you, Brian, for just a terrific interview and just bringing your decades of experience about digital health to this program.